I'm going to preface this by saying I've kind of been cheating with everything. It's kind of an amalgam of many things. So time is an element. And some of you may have seen some of this stuff before, so in the spirit of rehashing and recycling, I ask your forgiveness in advance. Right, are we going? No, not yet. I wanted to make sure that the essence behind this, or the ethos, is about keeping it real. Now, it sounds a bit wishy-washy, but this is actually anti-time management. If you take this at face value, your lessons will go on for about 12 hours each one. But that's not a bad thing. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Ooh. Okay. So the first few slides are about the ethos. This is about the loop. Okay. So you've got to make sure that with your students, everything is coming back, always looping around and around, and the students are making sure that there is a clear distinction and knowing that the activities are being bookended. So everything you do, whether that's a single activity, a lesson, a session, a week, or a course, should have these bookends. So this idea of bookending and loops are together. Okay, now, in the essence of being green, and I mean green in a lexical sense, the idea is that you should be recycling everything that you learn or everything that you cover in your classes. I use the analogy of a piano. Learning the piano, you will do your scales over and over again. So why can't your students be doing that as well? Also, you should be giving all of your students a mental challenge. This idea of generative learning, where students mentally play with information to create their own personal meaning. And I think this idea of personalization is very, very important. It's a real mantra for me, making things personal. Okay, of course, by making things personal, we encourage our students to be reflective learners. And if you're a reflective teacher, and this whole idea of lifelong learning will create reflective teaching, then the knock-on effect is that your students will be reflective learners as well. I think that's very important. But of course, the challenge is that there's a shitload of stuff out there. In fact, there's too much stuff out there. What do we do? Well, actually, the ethos behind this experiment is ditching course books and ditching materials because there's just too much of it. So the whole basis was to deal with that. So the product of this experiment, I guess, was to make a 90-minute lesson. The challenge was a 90-minute lesson from 3 sheets of paper. So how could we do that? That was my challenge that I set myself, to create lessons from nothing. Now, we've all heard about dogma and whatever else, but I guess that was the ethos. So the core of this would be that the students would have ownership of the lesson. There would be there would be engagement, of course. There would also be this idea of essential ingredients, process language, so more focus on the process than the product. This idea of deconstruction and reconstruction. Those of you who've taught Cambridge exams, it's very important to deconstruct and reconstruct. Students learn a lot from this. The other one was generative learning again. Noticing, scaffolding, giving students, making sure that they have a written record of everything they do, and also this idea of shared negotiation and meaning, which gives this kind of concreting effect for the students and cements the whole thing. Okay, so the evolution of this experiment was I was a DOS and I was doing relief and I had no time, so I wanted to be able to jump into the classroom with 0 preparation. It essentially this experiment went from warm-up to lesson, and it went from a 5-minute warm-up until a 90-minute lesson. The underpinning research was things like teaching unplugged, those of you who know things about that, emergent grammar, generative learning, the idea of learning communities, noticing, and I guess wrapped up in a task-based approach as well. Okay. The keystones or principles, I suppose, were giving students a shared lexicon and getting them to contribute to this themselves, extending things to their maximum possible limit, focusing on the process as opposed to the product, a bit old school really, and I guess this idea of time versus task. So the stages, student-generated vocab emerges, we then define it, we then focus on spelling and pronunciation, we then get the students to write definitions about this vocab that they have generated themselves, and then we put that into a creative writing format. The creative writing becomes a dictogloss. The dictogloss becomes a running comprehension. The running comprehension we then reverse, and I can explain that in more detail, but not in 20 seconds. And then the whole thing is wrapped up with reflection, and that's the loop, if you like. Okay, principles. The idea is really for you to create your own kind of 10 commandments of teaching principles. I think it's very important for people to do this. Sit down and work out what are the 10 things that you would really think are essential to your own teaching. It's quite an interesting task because it does create this kind of idea of reflection in your own teaching. Okay, right, so the idea then that there's this kind of bubble, the reality that I was in direct DOS's bubble and I couldn't really do anything other than this. There was too much baggage that I had to bring into the classroom, so I needed to be free of that and some other stuff. The future. So what does the future hold? For me, it's about more frameworks, simple frameworks that release me from materials and allow me to do things that are within my own time frame. And real communication, I guess, and this idea of extending things to their maximum possible limit. The layers, this is the ideal, and I'll read this. Simply by the addition of further layers and layers of questions that probe and probe at the learner's emergent understanding until not a word has been bypassed, not a discourse marker ignored, not a verb ending overlooked, and not a question left unanswered. Okay, that's the ideal, but obviously that might take 12 hours. Now, to refresh, it's about the loop, it's about bookending everything that you do in your classes, it's about recycling language as much as possible, giving students a challenge and yourself a challenge, and to develop yourself into this idea of being reflective and that reflection to transmit to your students. Thank you.